So I'm going to show you today how I have converted some older sculpts, some older meshes to my Physique original and Hourglass kit. These are a couple of bikinis that I made when I first started One Bad Pics a couple of years ago. So I imported the files using file append and found them in the objects folder of the blend file that they were in. And they come in 90 degrees rotated because they were created on the old Second Life avatar skeleton. So the first thing I did was go into the top view and rotate each of them by 90 degrees so they're facing the correct direction for Avastar. The next step is to delete the Second Life skeletons that don't belong here. So you just find them in Outliner and delete them, and that shows the items just floating in the Outliner view, not attached to anything. Then I made sure neither of those objects had an avatar modifier or an armature modifier, and I deleted all of the shape keys from them so that I have a nice fresh mesh to start with. Here you can see I've just gone into edit mode on the bikini top and I'm scaling it in the X and Y axis for a rough fit, and I'll start tweaking the fit of it in a moment. So basically I just go and look at the bikini compared to the body underneath, and anywhere that it's clipping gets slightly tweaked so that it's a little bit bigger so that it floats above the surface of the body, and anything that's too far away I tweak it a little bit so that it's a bit closer. This is quite a lengthy process when you're first starting out, converting from old standard sizes to a avatar mesh. I usually start with the XS size because that's what the avatar mesh was actually based on. And during this process you'll see I go in and out of wireframe view so that I can actually see through the mesh I'm working on to the body underneath, which makes it easy to line up the mesh with the skin. So you can see the skin is the blue section and the mesh is the part that I'm working on that I can see through there. Just make sure I don't make any mistakes. If you start with XS on Physique Original, you'll generally have a good fit to start with and there won't be much tweaking to do. I also use wireframe view to facilitate seeing through the skin if there's a clothing section that's actually sitting underneath the skin. Just a couple little more tweaks here and there. It's important to get the clothing close to the skin, so if it's too far away, move it closer. If it's too close or floating underneath the skin, move it away. You don't want clothing to be floating half a mile away from your body when you get it into Second Life. You'd like it to be nice and flush. And remember that this mesh kit is indicative of the underwear layer on the Physique bodies, so you can get pretty close to it and not have any skin clipping because the underwear layer floats a little ways above the skin. So here I'm editing the bikini bottom, and again just using scale and grab in edit mode to move it roughly into place. I do also use sculpt mode when I'm editing the shape of something. I find a combination of edit and sculpt mode to give me quite a nice result, and it doesn't take too long. So again here I'm just checking, finding where it's clipping and moving it into place. tweaking the mesh as well if I see any strange sort of shapes that I might have missed when I first created this garment. It happens. So you can see a large area of this front of this bikini needs to be moved. So I grab it all with C and I move it backwards with proportional editing on so that you can actually see the transition. So this is why it's important to check in all angles, because I accidentally pulled this line of vertices out of position by using the red arrow instead of probably the green one. I like to try and keep my mesh basic shape fairly smooth. It can cause some odd lighting issues in Second Life if it's not. Making sure the shape is nice and covers your modesty. And here I'm adding a subdivision surface modifier, which gives me a nice smooth appearance and allows me to use sculpt mode and get a really nice result with sculpt mode. So make sure sculpt mode you have symmetry on in the correct direction. I didn't, I accidentally had it on X as well as Z. So I had to go back and undo a few steps. And this is where I realized I had the extra symmetry on. And this is where I realized I had the wrong symmetry on. So it's working now. So here I'm just using sculpt mode to do the final tweaks of the shape, making sure it's all sitting nice and close to the body and getting it looking good, nice and flush, good fit, good shape. If I've got it nice and close and I think the mesh could do with some smoothing out, I use the smooth tool and I smooth it to the point where it's just clipping inside the skin, and then I'll use the inflate tool, the inflate brush, to bring it back out to the shape it needs to be, and I can get a nice fine control this way. You can see me doing that, smoothing it out until it's just clipping, pulling out the little bits that clip. Adding a subsurface modifier to the bikini top and seeing where it causes it to clip. And then with the sculpt tool, just fixing up those few little bits. You can see when I'm working, I constantly rotate using my Alt key. I'm constantly rotating around the model, zooming in and out, flipping into front and side view and making sure it looks good from all angles. Again, making sure things don't float too far away from the body, because this body differs a little, quite a lot in some areas, from the Second Life default. So what fit the Second Life default will not necessarily fit this one. The sculpt tool is nice because it lets you move all parts of the mesh together. This bikini top has a separate knot and bow for the tie at the back, for both the ties at the back, and sculpt mode lets you grab all of it together. Okay, I'm done with the shaping of the mesh. So I'm ready to start with the weight painting. Now I started with this data transfer, which you'll see me do it a couple of times here, but Avastar kept throwing me an error, so I eventually used the bind meshes, using the mesh as my data transfer in the Avastar tool rather than the data transfer modifier, which usually works. But for some reason today it wasn't working, so I just worked around it. And there's the error. So I'll just speed through the next part. So this is when I realized my data transfer technique wasn't working. So I switched to transfer from meshes in the Avastar bind to armature tool, and that worked fine, so I used it on both pieces. Just deleting the old Vertex groups that were no longer needed. And putting my subsurf modifier back. Alright, now before I start weight painting, I just double check and make sure that the sliders are working. And they are. Just quickly change one of the sliders to the most extreme setting so I can see where I need to start. Don't mind that noise in the background. My cat decided to murder a cardboard box. One of the things Blender has added recently is this fantastic smooth vertex tool. So you select a bone and put the mesh into vertex selection mode, and then when you do that, on the left underneath the weight paint tools, you can actually see the smooth tool there. So hit smooth a couple of times, press Alt Q to refresh the view, and you can see it's already a lot better than it was. So this process of tweaking the weights is a long and fairly tedious one. It basically involves finding out where the mesh is stretched. So I put the, say, breast slider into the 100 position, and look closely at my mesh, and you can see there it's stretched on the ring in between the two halves of the bikini. So I need to reduce that, which means removing the weights from the breastbone. So I select each one and I take my subtract brush and I get in close on the mesh and I subtract it a little bit at a time. So I've got a fairly low strength on my brush so that I'm only taking a little bit at a time, tap away a few times and press Alt Q. And eventually you reach a point where your mesh starts clipping with the body again, so you can just use the add and bring that back out to where it belongs. Make sure you're not painting through to the other side of your mesh. So I normally work with the limit viewport on, which is a button down the bottom of your screen, and it's called limit selection to visible, so that I can actually see through the mesh, through the body, and what's on the other side. You can see at the top there, you can actually see through to see the strap behind the body, and that way you can position your view so that when you're painting your weights and blurring and whatnot, you don't accidentally put weight from one of the pectoral bones through to the back of the garment, which you wouldn't want. And again, this is a fairly time-consuming process, but if you just put some music on, you know, it can be pretty zen, just playing with these colours and getting it all to look good. So once again, you can see me rotating in all directions and figuring out where it's pulling too much and where it's not pulling enough. So here I worked out that the bikini was pulling quite far away from the breasts in the front there, but that's actually a fit issue rather than a weights issue. So try not to resolve fitting issues with your weight painting, because you'll just end up with a mess. So what I did here was I tabbed back out into object mode and removed the sliders. If you try to edit the mesh with the sliders attached, it'll explode when you try to change anything. So I took the sliders off and I just quickly tweaked the mesh into shape around the body where those little gaps were that shouldn't have been there. So once I was happy with the shape again, back into object mode, attach the SL appearance sliders and recommence weight painting. So here, because I moved the mesh, I needed to just adjust that front bikini cup. That's already looking pretty good. So once I've done the major sliders, which in this case is going to be the breast size, I can just change some of the lesser used ones like cleavage and gravity. Just make sure there's no clipping with those settings set at the maximum. I find working at the maximum slider setting to give me a pretty good result over all slider settings. Does that make sense? Because if it doesn't clip at max, it's not going to clip at 80 or 50 or whatever. And here I've turned off limit selection so I can just work on the front of the mesh. Or turned on. No clipping in zero gravity. Because of the way the second life breastbones work, low breast slider settings don't really work with these avatars, but you can get down to about 30 without major issues. So I like to just check and make sure it's not too bad in that lower setting. And cleavage. So here I'm actually subtracting weights from the chest rather than adding to the breast. Weight painting is very much a balance of adding and subtracting weights from here and there to make sure that everything looks good. And just checking on the minimum setting for breast cleavage. I do a very quick check on torso muscles and body fat and neck thickness. And the body fat check showed me that there was something funky going on with the belly bone. So I actually went in and removed it completely because the bikini doesn't really need to be influenced by the belly bone. Except for a little bit, which I'll show you in a moment. So I actually went into the torso sliders here and set the belly bone to 100. Oh yes, don't forget to save. I don't save anywhere near as much as I should. And I removed the weights from the belly, from the bikini top altogether, so that I could start fresh with it. I just took a big brush, set to subtract, and brushed away and hit Alt Q between every few strokes. So I've got limit selection to visible turned off here, so you can see through the other side of the mesh. And all I'm doing is just with the add brush set at a low strength, just tapping in some influence from the belly bone so that the clipping that you saw a moment ago goes away. One of the last things I check before I am ready to call this mesh done is I do a movement check. So I select the long green bones and put the body into various poses. I tend to go more extreme than not because that will really show me if there's a clipping issue. Try everything out and make sure that everything on the mesh I'm working on is moving correctly and I don't have any clipping. And correct any issues that I see as I come across them. So here there's a little clipping from the neck, so I need to remove some influence from the neck bone. And the same on the other side. Making sure all the weights are nice and smooth so that I've got nice smooth movement on my mesh. Nobody likes a jaggy bikini after all. Unless you do like a jaggy bikini, in which case, you know, go for it. Making sure your little unattached pieces like knots and buttons and zips don't stretch too much with the body. It's okay for a little bit of stretching, but for, you know, realism's sake, you don't want your button to become an oval when your avatar moves. Likewise, you don't want your knot to get stretched all out of proportion. So here I'm just cleaning up some of the excess vertex groups that were created from the data transfer. Second Life only supports 4 weights per vertex, so only 4 bones can affect any one vertex. If you have more than 4, it indiscriminately removes them. And now I'm finished with the bikini top, so I'll start working on the bikini bottoms, which is basically more of the same. Selecting bones, making sure they don't cause any clipping issues, moving them around, changing the sliders. So here I'm putting the lower body sliders into the extreme setting of 100 to make sure that when that slider is set, it doesn't clip. The main ones for the bikini bottom are the butt slider, the saddlebags, and the belly. For a high cut garment like this, you won't need the leg sliders. You can see the belly is always a bit of an issue. It's a bit of an awkward bone and it creates some awkward movement in the mesh, so it's really just a case of getting in there and working on it with a low strength brush and Alt Q, and just tap away with your brush until it's no longer clipping and it's nice and smooth. So here I have the pelvis C-bone selected and I'm working on that influence. There are two bones that influence the belly size, and that is the pelvis and the belly. The pelvis bone also influences the saddlebag slider and the butt slider. And here I am just using Vertex selection to smooth out the influence from that belly bone. I use the smooth option, the smooth button, as kind of blocking. So I get the weights smooth to start off with, and then I go in with my add and subtract and blur brushes and tweak them until I'm satisfied with the result. Weight painting is really a balancing act. And sometimes even if the mesh is completely blue when you've got a bone selected, it doesn't necessarily mean there are no influences from that bone. It just maybe that they're very faint or light, and you still need to pay attention to them. If it hasn't been obvious until now, the redder the colour on the mesh, the stronger the influence from the bone. So bright red is 100% influence, and dark blue is 0 or very, very light influence, no influence. And the warmer the colour gets, so the colour goes through turquoise and green and yellow and orange up to red, and the warmer it gets, the stronger the bone influence. It's called heat, which makes sense when you think about it. Bone heat. Just making sure that belly bone doesn't pull out the crotch of the garment. And going in and out of wireframe as needed to see through the mesh to see what I'm doing a bit clearer. Wireframe is especially useful if you want to see your body mesh compared to your clothing mesh all at once. Making sure the bikini bottoms move nicely. And here I've discovered that this is fairly standard when you're working with clothes on the legs and pelvis. Sometimes you get influence from the leg bones that don't belong. It doesn't belong. So it's just a case of selecting the leg bones in weight paint mode and removing the influence and putting the avatar into uncomfortable splits, which no one in Second Life ever does, but just making sure those bones don't influence that mesh in the center of the body there. And of course you don't need weights from the leg on the bows, so I just take that out. Doing a clean vertex group and making sure that there's nothing that has too many weights on it. And this bikini bottom is pretty much perfect. There are no vertices that have more than 4 weights, so I shouldn't experience any strangeness in Second Life. I decided here to go and add a little bit weight from the leg bone, the actual orange one, just to provide a little bit more of a realistic movement there. And what I'm doing here is I'm just basically looking for any stray weights that might be influencing the mesh where they shouldn't be. If you move the bones around, say the leg bones, you can see pretty quickly if you get any spikes whether there's a stray weight that needs to be resolved. And I'm pretty happy with this now, so I'm exporting it to Avatar Day. And uploading it to Second Life. I'm logged into my One Bad Pixel account, so I can upload those meshes there and update all of those One Bad Pixel creations to be Physique compatible. When I upload, I tend to drop the lowest LOD to 0, and I use the lowest LOD as my physics choice on the second tab, and that tends to give me a fairly low cost mesh. Of course, my internet connection means it takes ages to upload. There we go. try it on. And here's Pix looking gorgeous in her Physique body. And that bikini looks pretty nice. Looks, seems to move nicely. Seems to distort with the sliders nicely. It even looks good with the belly on. And in Second Life, I just double check all of the sliders I checked in Blender just to see if I missed something, because when the avatar is moving around, you may see things that you don't necessarily see in Blender. And that one's ready to go. So back to Blender, and I'm going to do the Hourglass conversion. So I do a quick duplicate of my two meshes, and I turn off the original one and rename them so that I know what I'm doing, so I know what I'm working with. And then I hide the original body and turn on the Hourglass body. So you can see immediately where it needs to be tweaked and where it fits fine. So the main changes for Hourglass are obviously in the breasts and in the hips. So I again use a combination of edit mode and sculpt mode to bring the mesh out to fit. When I made the Hourglass body, I made it so that the weights were almost identical to the Physique original body. So all that really needs to be done is tweak the shape to fit and check the sliders and correct any little issues that may still exist. But once you've done the weighting for the original body, adjusting to Hourglass should be fairly straightforward and easy. I didn't want to make people have to do a whole lot of rework in order to create for the Hourglass. So the idea is you create on the original mesh body and you just adjust the shape to suit the Hourglass body. You can see me here using wireframe again to see through my mesh to the mesh body underneath so that I can get a nice close fit. In sculpt mode, I use a combination of the grab brush and the smooth brush, I think I mentioned earlier. Once I get it in roughly the right position, I'll smooth it all out, like here. And you can see this creates some clipping, but it gets the mesh nice and neat. And once I'm happy with it, I take the inflate brush and just inflate the mesh back out a little bit to float above the body. and that gets me a nice, clean, close fit. It also makes sure if I've got any edges sculpted into this mesh like I do in this one, where the edge of the mesh goes around and underneath so that you don't see an invisible inside, that I inflate that back out, because the smooth tool can tend to minimize and deflate that a little bit. So this gives it a nice solid edge. Making sure I have a nice pleasing neckline. Here I realised that I had changed all of this shape without removing the avatar sliders, which would have been bad, because as soon as I changed the slider, the entire mesh would have just exploded into oblivion. So if you find yourself having done that, go into the Vertex Groups tab, which is the one with the little triangle and the 3 dots on each corner, and delete the shape keys, and then remove the apply the sliders, and then you should be able to do your edits to your mesh and then reattach the sliders when you're ready. So all of this tweaking and fine-tuning is really just because I'm a little bit obsessive, and I just like to make sure my mesh looks nice. Textures in Second Life can hide a lot of sins, but I like to make sure that it looks good in Blender before I even get to Second Life. So it's nice and round and curvy and attractive. Once I'm happy with the shape of the bikini top, I go and have a look at the bikini bottom, which you can see is requires quite a lot of work. So I start first of all with pulling out the back, pull the whole thing backwards a little tiny bit, make sure you detach your sliders again before you do this, or a mess will happen. When you're looking at large areas of clipping like this, I use proportional editing, and I select vertices sort of in the middle of the clipping area, and then I can pull it out nice and evenly. And I'm always adjusting the size of my proportional editing brush, and I always try to work symmetrically. So if something like this, if I'm going to scale this in the x-axis, which I am doing here, use a large proportional editing area and scale symmetrically. Symmetry is easy when you work in the side view, which is 3 on your number pad. So you can just select and then select through to the mesh on the other side. If you have limit selection to visible turned off. So here I'm using wireframe again to just see the body mesh compared to the garment so that I can pull it into shape. Get it all nicely fitted. I probably spend more time on this sort of thing than is strictly necessary, but I do like to make sure I have a neat mesh and the shape is pleasing once it gets into Second Life. You don't have any odd sort of bumps or bits that don't look like they belong. And here you can see there's a section of the mesh bikini pants that is too far away. So I just go into sculpt mode and with symmetry on, pull that a bit closer. Keep in mind that clothing has volume, so you need to consider what kind of fabric your garment is made out of and how many folds or seams or stitches that it needs to represent. You don't want clothing that looks like it's been painted on, but you don't want it to gape everywhere either. And now I'm just inflating the bikini pants out a little bit because the smooth brush caused the inside and the outside to be a little bit close together. So I'm just giving a little more volume with the inflate brush. And now that I'm happy with the shape, reattach the sliders and reattach the sliders on the top, and we'll go and have a look at the weights. So the first thing I do is set the breast slider to 100, and you can see straight away there's a little bit of work to be done here. So what I decided to do here was, instead of adding extra weight to the breastbone influence, I have decided to subtract a little bit from the chest. The breastbone, when you move the breast sliders, moves the mesh away from the body. I used the chest bone, which doesn't move, as a way of constraining the movement of the mesh when it's being influenced by sliders like the breastbone. So in this case, I want the chest to constrain the breast area a little bit less, so I take a bit of bone heat off that area and add a little bit from the breastbone. Looks pretty good. Same on the other side. I know there's probably a way for me to weight paint symmetrically, but I've never gotten it to work reliably, so I just don't bother with it. It's not part of my workflow. My add brush here is very low strength, so I'm basically just tapping away, a couple of taps, and then Alt Q to refresh the shape until I'm satisfied with the result and it looks nice and smooth. And just checking these sliders at lower settings. Hourglass isn't really designed to have a flat chest, so you can't really go too low with it. But just a little tweak here and there. Right, check a couple of other sliders. Torso muscles and body fat, and that all looks pretty good. And onto the bikini bottom. There's really only a little tiny bit of tweaking to be done here. The main bones that influence this area are the pelvis collision bone, the belly collision bone, and the M pelvis skeleton bone. Checking the saddlebags. So what I'm doing here is removing some of the influence from the M pelvis bone to allow the pelvis bone to have a little more influence on the mesh. In those two areas. And just checking there are no vertices moving with bones they shouldn't be moving with. And it's ready for upload. Quick sanity check on posing. And over to Second Life. Once again, I set the LOD to as close to 0 as it can get and use physics. Use that as my physics, and then don't forget also to check include the skeleton on the third tab. wait forever for it to upload. And I've already switched to the hourglass body with pics here. So I just add that and have a look. Looks pretty good. I can see a little bit of clipping on the side of the breast there, so I'll go and fix that in a moment. I realised it was a bit of influence from one of the lower bones that was causing that clipping on the chest. So once I found it, I just put the mesh into weight paint mode and selected the belly bone, which is where that weight was coming from, and just took it off that area. And the same on the other side. When you are attaching your mesh garments to the avatar, I would always recommend using an attachment point that makes sense. Don't just use the default attachment point despite the fact that it looks right. If you do, you can find yourself, if you're wearing a shopping bag or something like that, naked in public places because your clothes fall off because it's attached to the right hand. So shirts should be attached to the chest attachment points, and pants should be attached to the pelvis, just to prevent any potential conflicts with other mesh objects and attachments. So I'm just uploading that bikini top. And deleting the old broken one. And now with that new bikini on, it looks pretty good and I'm very happy with it. So those two garments are now ready for texturing and adding to the product bag for updating. Just a quick check on the sliders to make sure nothing has gone astray. That looks good. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this has been a helpful video and you get something out of it. If you have any questions, please leave them for me in the comments and I'll answer you when I can. Cheers.